Tension hung heavy in the Alexandria Federal Courthouse's air as Judge Anthony Trenga delivered a stern scowl at Elon Musk from the bench. Contempt dripped from his words as he addressed Musk. "Mr. Musk, the court is unimpressed by your wealth and by your popularity. Your affront to this court proceeding comes close to being contempt." There was silence in the room, with journalists rapidly making notes as the richest man alive addressed the judge and heard potentially ruinous judgment read against his satellite communications corporation. Judge Trenga had only just finished 10 minutes of publicly excoriating the technology mogul, characterizing his arguments as legal sophistry and his defense as a travesty of due legal process. The judge continued, and he became more and more belligerent. "Maybe Mr. Musk believes the laws that ordinary people have to follow don't apply to him." What followed left the entire courtroom in shock. Instead of yelling back or flushing with humiliation, Musk just rummaged inside his suit coat and produced a single sheet of paper that everyone had ever seen before. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I believe this evidence would change the thinking of the court in this case." Musk's attorney took the paper, obviously shocked. This was not on their game plan. Judge Trenga's face darkened from disgust to alarm, and as the paper was taken to the bench, the color of the judge's face whitened. Immediately after, the judge, who was so eager to embarrass Musk, demanded an abrupt recess, his hand trembling as he grasped papers in a mad rush. Before we delve into the details of this volatile courtroom showdown and the letter which completely reversed the case, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more insightful face-offs of powerful people. Judge Anthony Trenga had acquired the reputation as an aggressive and straight-shooting judge in the Eastern District of Virginia, who everyone knew despised high-profile defendants. Placed on the federal bench in 2008, Trenga had presided over numerous complex cases related to telecommunications and national security. With his silver hair and piercing eyes, Trenga commanded pure respect in his courtroom, often cutting lawyers off mid-sentence and dishing out withering rebukes to those he considered wasting the court's time. The case before him, FCC versus Starlink Communications, was the biggest regulatory hurdle Elon Musk's satellite internet company had ever faced. The Federal Communications Commission had sued Starlink for breaking spectrum allocation rules. They demanded not just huge monetary penalties, but also an injunction compelling Starlink to power down thousands of satellites already launched into orbit, risking outages for over 800,000 subscribers worldwide, including life-critical infrastructure in remote villages and developing nations. More was at risk for Musk than corporate profit. Starlink had become a key component of disaster response, providing lifeline communications during natural disasters. More personally, Musk had bet his own reputation on Starlink's goal of providing internet connectivity to underserved communities globally. This isn't about technical violations of old regulations, Musk had said to reporters outside the courthouse just a few hours before. This is a matter of whether America will keep pace with leading in space-based communications or abdicate that position to competitors from abroad who don't have our values. Thousands of communities rely on Starlink as their only link to the contemporary world. The case had raised strong interest among the telecommunication industry as well as national security authorities. Large telecom providers had submitted amicus briefs in support of the FCC's argument, while retired defense officials defended Starlink's operation continuing due to its strategic value. Throughout initial hearings, Judge Trenga had displayed blatant hostility toward Musk's legal team, frequently interrupting them as he allowed the FCC attorneys plenty of room to argue. When Musk's primary attorney tried to introduce evidence of selective enforcement by the FCC, Trenga brushed it aside as immaterial to the case. When one of Musk's lawyers had suggested that maybe the lawsuit could be politically driven, Trenga threatened sanctions for frivolous argument. What no one in the courtroom knew was that Musk had commissioned an investigation after noticing unusual patterns in the regulatory activity against Starlink. This investigation uncovered communications of coordination between certain FCC officials, executives of competing telecommunication companies, and perhaps even Judge Trenga himself. These discoveries effectively raised serious doubts about the impartiality of the judge. While Musk stood outside the courtroom, weathering the public chastising from the judge, he was not only coming to the defense of his company, he may have been disclosing a coordinated attack on a competitor. The paper he had submitted was poised to totally transform the direction of the proceedings. The courtroom's breath was collectively held as Judge Treanor announced a 15-minute recess. As he walked behind the bench, murmurs circulated rapidly through the room. Journalists were texting their editors frantically, while lawyers from both sides engaged in animated discussions, obviously shocked by the turn of events. "What just happened?" a reporter whispered. "I've never seen Treanor call a recess in the middle of delivering an opinion." 20 minutes passed, then 30, with no sign of the judge. Court officers exchanged puzzled glances, occasionally eyeing the door to the judge's chambers. Finally, after nearly 45 minutes, the bailiff instructed everyone to rise as Judge Treanor re-entered the courtroom. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a cautious, measured demeanor. "Before we continue," began Judge Treanor, his voice much calmer now, "I'd like to address the documents submitted by the defense. Mr. Musk, would you like to explain to us the importance of this evidence to the court?" Musk rose slowly from his seat, his expression grave but composed. "Your Honor, what I've presented is an email thread between senior FCC officials and executives at Quantum Communications, our primary competitor. These communications, dated 3 weeks before this lawsuit was filed, outline a coordinated strategy to use regulatory action to, in their words, neutralize the Starlink advantage." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Musk continued. "More concerning, on page 3, you'll find references to ensuring the case will be assigned to a sympathetic judge with specific mention of this court." The FCC's chief counsel leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, we are not aware of these supposed communications. This is an obvious attempt to divert attention from the apparent regulatory violations at stake." Judge Treanor held up a hand. "I'll hear from you in a moment, counsel." Turning to Musk again, he asked, "Mr. Musk, how did you receive these communications?" "Through legal discovery in a separate antitrust case, Your Honor," Musk replied. "Quantum Communications was forced to produce these emails last week in ongoing litigation in the Northern District of California. Our lawyers received them last night." One of the junior attorneys from the FCC team whispered anxiously to her peers, clearly agitated by this revelation. Musk's attorneys, however, distributed additional copies of the document to the court clerk and opposing counsel. "In addition, Your Honor," Musk added, "we've forwarded these messages to the Public Integrity Division of the Department of Justice, as they suggest potential violations of federal statute in relation to judicial proceedings." Judge Treanor's expression turned black at the mention of the DOJ. "Mr. Musk, are you accusing improper action on the part of this court?" "I'm not making any accusations, Your Honor," Musk replied guardedly. "I am merely introducing evidence that puts into question the genesis and motivation of this case. The document speaks for itself." The courtroom tensions mounted as a surprise figure stood up from the gallery, a woman in a black suit who made her way to the bailiff and produced credentials. Following a short exchange, the bailiff went over to the bench and quietly addressed Judge Treanor, whose face became more and more troubled. "Approach the bench, counsel," Treanor instructed. As lawyers held an inaudible huddle, the judge's face altered from tightly controlled concern to almost repressed shock. When sidebar was over, Judge Treanor addressed the courtroom. "Due to new information and developments, this court will recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." As murmurs coursed around the room, he continued, "And the court will be considering a recusal motion on the materials in front of us today." As the judge quickly left, the female who had spoken to the bailiff walked over to Musk. She discreetly pulled out a badge stating that she was a Public Integrity Section member of the DOJ. Her brief exchange with Musk was not audible to the crowd, but the nod from Musk signaled acquiescence to whatever request had been made. Outside in the street was a media spectacle, with dozens of cameras huddled by the door and reporters barking questions. When lawyers from both sides appeared, The FCC lawyers rushed by, grim-faced and speechless. By the time Musk appeared, the audience fell silent. "Mr. Musk," a CNN reporter yelled. "What happened in there?" Musk paused, choosing his words carefully. "Today we presented evidence that suggests this case could be bigger than usual regulatory enforcement. Beyond that, out of respect for the judicial process, I won't say more until proceedings conclude." As Musk walked to his parked vehicle, his composed personality was in jarring contrast with the chaos building behind him, where legal observers were already offering educated speculation regarding the bomb that had just gone off in Judge Trenga's courtroom. The next morning, the Alexandria Federal Courthouse was surrounded by news vans and reporters several hours before the resumed 9 a.m. hearing. Inside, the courtroom was crowded to the top, with attorneys, reporters, and spectators holding standing room court, eager to see the resolution of yesterday's surprising turn of events. When Judge Trenga did appear, his transformation was shocking. The smirk and haughty tone were a thing of the past. Instead, he appeared serious, almost subdued, as he addressed the packed room. "Before we proceed," he began, his voice even, "having considered the evidence heard yesterday and consulted with the chief judge of this district, I am recusing myself from this case, effective immediately." The courtroom erupted into gasps and murmurs. Trenga raised his hand for silence. "I want to make it plain that I do not admit to any impropriety or bias. But the communications presented before us call into question the appearance of impartiality, which could undermine confidence in these proceedings. The case will be assigned to a different judge in this district." Trenga gathered his papers and stood up to depart when he paused and held Musk's gaze for the very first time without hostility. Judge Trenga addressed the court, issuing a quasi-apology for any remarks that might have been prejudicial to Elon Musk or his company before all the evidence had been heard. Through this staggering confession, the judge left the courtroom the last time on this case, leaving an aghast silence behind. As soon as the door closed behind him, the courtroom erupted into a chatter of words. Musk just sat there, having a quiet discussion with his lawyers. There was no expression of happiness or gratification on his face, just a concentrated, enduring determination. A court clerk later announced that Chief Judge Raymond Morris would be addressing the court. As Judge Morris arrived, his solemn expression indicated the gravity with which he approached the developments underway. "Good morning," he began. "Due to Judge Trenga's recusal, I have temporarily assumed jurisdiction of this case to settle some matters of urgency." He then addressed the FCC's attorneys. "Counsel, the court has been solicited by the Department of Justice in regard to potential impropriety in correspondence between your agency and private corporations concerning this litigation. Would you like to address that question?" The FCC's head lawyer stood twiddling his thumbs. "Your Honor, we discovered about these communications yesterday. We've initiated an internal investigation and instructed our clients to preserve all relevant records. We'd appreciate a 30-day continuance in order to consider the case carefully." Judge Morris nodded and turned to Musk's attorneys. "I notice you have an outstanding motion," he said. Musk's lead attorney stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. Based on the evidence of impropriate coordination in filing this action, we move for summary dismissal of all claims against Starlink Communications." The next moment was nothing short of amazing. Judge Morris glanced at a woman in the front row, the same Department of Justice representative who had appeared the previous day. "Ms. Cartwright, as the representative of the Public Integrity Section, does the department take a position on this?" he asked. Ms. Cartwright stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. Following our preliminary review of the communications presented yesterday, the department does have grave questions regarding the intent behind this enforcement action. We prefer to have all proceedings stayed pending our investigation, which we expect to be finished within 60 days. After a brief recess, Judge Morris delivered his ruling. The court holds that there is reasonable cause to question the propriety of the proceedings. Accordingly, I am ordering a 60-day stay in the case. In addition, the temporary injunction on Starlink operations is hereby vacated subject to further hearings. This ruling, reversing Judge Trenga's previous decrees and allowing Starlink to reopen for business in full was a tremendous victory for Musk. But its implications extended beyond the case at hand. The revelations of potential coordination between regulators, private business, and a federal judge raised serious questions about the integrity of the judicial system. As the hearings closed, journalists were in a mad dash to publish the news. Outside the courthouse, legal commentators at once declared a case of judicial misconduct of historic proportion, noting that even those occupying powerful positions in the judiciary are not exempt from responsibility. This was absolute vindication for Musk, who the previous day had been publicly embarrassed by Judge Trenga. But in speaking to waiting reporters, he was tight-lipped. Today's outcome is not about personal victory, Musk said matter-of-factly. It's about ensuring our legal system operates equitably for everyone. Starlink will continue to provide vital communication services around the world while cooperating fully with the Department of Justice's investigation. The integrity of our institutions is more paramount than any one case or firm. This response, specifically addressed to a man who is prone to being rash in his manner of speech, took many by surprise. It also served to feed the perception that Musk, in this instance, not only displayed business sense but also statesmanship per se, refusing to bend before the apparent institutional corruption. The effect of what would come to be known as the Trenga recusal was felt instantly throughout Washington, Wall Street, and the global telecommunications industry. In the hours following Judge Morris's lifting of the injunction on Starlink, the company's stock price shot up by 42%, adding more than $30 billion in market value in one day of trading. On the other hand, Quantum Communications, the company accused of the improper coordination, lost 27% of its share value as investors grew worried about possible criminal investigations. The FCC was also in crisis. That evening, the commission chairman directed an independent review of all enforcement actions over the last 18 months and placed 2 senior officials on administrative leave. Just 3 days later, the commission's general counsel had stepped down because of personal reasons, even as it was publicly acknowledged that the resignation was the first casualty of the mounting scandal. For Judge Anthony Trenga, the consequences were immediate and severe. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals Judicial Council launched an investigation into his conduct, and sources revealed he had been removed from all cases involving telecommunications or technology companies until the probe progressed. Legal observers speculated that if evidence existed that he had colluded with players in cases in front of him, the probe could ultimately lead to impeachment. The Justice Department investigation expanded rapidly. Federal authorities executed search warrants within 2 weeks at Quantum Communications headquarters and the homes of 2 ex-officials at the FCC. Court documents said that the authorities were examining potential violations of federal statutes, such as conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and honest services fraud. Congress responded to the expanding scandal with crossover backing. Judiciary Committee Chairman Senator James Harrison called for hearings on judicial impartiality in the age of information, while Representative Maria Gonzalez called for a special prosecutor to determine the extent of corruption in telecommunications regulation. The case had brought on a wider public discussion about the convergence of government power, corporate influence, and control of technology. For those locations served by Starlink, the impact was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. In one rural fishing community on the coast of Alaska, individuals cheered upon being informed that their Starlink service, under threat from the injunction, would remain intact. The local school principal told reporters, "Without this connection, our students would be deprived of access to advanced courses in telemedicine, services that literally have saved lives here." These tales came from rural India, backwoods Australian outposts, and disaster recovery areas where Starlink was the only communication service that worked. A coordinator in one of the Philippines' typhoon-ravaged provinces stated, "We didn't know there were courtroom dramas in Virginia, but we did know our emergency communications could get shut down. Now, we can just keep on saving lives." Musk utilized the momentum from the legal victory to issue a statement of the enlargement of Starlink's humanitarian activities. Only a week after Judge Trenga's recusal, Musk announced a new project to provide free Starlink terminals and services for 1,000 schools in poor nations and to strengthen emergency response systems in disaster-prone regions. What began as resistance against perceived regulation and justice had morphed into an opportunity to demonstrate the true intention of Starlink's technology. Musk stated, "Connectivity isn't a luxury. It's essential infrastructure for education, healthcare, and economic opportunity." The case also triggered useful discussions among scholars of the law and ethic of individuals. Harvard law professor James Reynolds, in a widely circulated analysis, indicated that the Starlink case exposed telling dynamics eroding public trust in institutions. Musk's resolve to use fact-based evidence, and not just allegations, to confront judicial prejudice would be an important precedent for future cases in which accountability must be held accountable. Former FCC Commissioner Elenina Whitman agreed, saying that while regulatory capture is not new, this apparently concerted relationship between regulators, competitors, and a federal judge was particularly aggravating. The system worked in this case only because Musk had the resources to investigate and expose these relationships, she said. That observation stoked wider arguments about disproportionate access to justice. Legal advocacy groups noticed that few of the defendants were financially capable to investigate potential bias or improper coordination like Musk had accomplished. A few law schools, in turn, created new judicial accountability and regulation transparency clinical programs. 6 months into the court saga, the extent of coordination between the parties was revealed when the Department of Justice indicted 9 people, including one who is a former FCC commissioner, 3 quantum communications executives, and a former clerk, to Judge Trenga. The indictment revealed an alleged conspiracy to use regulatory action to disadvantage Starlink while benefiting its competitors. Judge Trenga himself was not criminally charged, but had surreptitiously gone on senior status, all but resigning from active service as the inquiry into his activities continued. For Musk, the final triumph came when a panel of 3 judges unanimously dismissed all remaining allegations of the FCC suit, ruling the enforcement action to have been contaminated with improper motivation from the outset. Reflecting on the case in a keynote address at a tech conference, Musk said, "There's a natural human tendency to defer to authority, whether it's judicial robes or regulatory credentials. This case taught me that skepticism toward authority is not just a right in our system. It's a responsibility." In the end, it was not the courtroom thriller that did the trick, but the simple emails that someone hoped would never be disclosed. Musk's case reminded everyone that openness is the most powerful weapon in maintaining institutional integrity. The case of Trenga versus Musk, now a standard teaching case in law schools across the nation, was made into a landmark case for analyzing the intersection of the judiciary and the technology firm in terms of accountability. As great as the win for Musk was enjoyed as a just outcome in this instance, the greater implications regarding flaws in the regulatory model and control of the judiciary have prompted debate around systemic change designed to prevent such abuses of the power system. For Starlink, the company emerged from the scandal stronger than ever, its purpose of bringing the unconnected and closer winning new public support and admiration. The satellites Judge Trenga had once threatened to deorbit just a few years before continued to orbit the Earth, fulfilling the promise of world connectivity that had sent them aloft.